Hello and welcome to the GZERO World Podcast. This is where you can find extended versions of my conversations on public television. I'm Ian Bremmer, and today I am digging into what may end up being the most consequential month in the Middle East in many years, just weeks after Israel launched a war against Iran and after President Trump greenlit U.S. airstrikes. All sides seemed eager to claim victory, or at least mission accomplished. A ceasefire is holding. But what was achieved? Iran, the clear loser of the 12-day war, entered as the weakest player and came out weaker still. With Hamas degraded, Hezbollah decimated, Syria toppled, and Russia distracted, Tehran stood mostly alone. Yet its regime can claim survival, some damage inflicted on Israel, and at least partial preservation of its nuclear program, though the extent remains unclear. Netanyahu was never interested in a ceasefire, but he emerged in a far stronger position, crippling Iran's capabilities, securing U.S. strikes on targets that Israel couldn't quite reach, and reversing his political fortunes at home. And as for Trump, this is the biggest foreign policy win to date of his second term. He helped dismantle Iran's nuclear and military infrastructure, avoided war, and saw no U.S. blowback. Iran was already weakened, but Trump called the bluff, and so far it's worked. Joining me now to break it all down, New York Times columnist and longtime Middle East analyst, Tom Friedman.
The GZERO World Podcast is brought to you by our lead sponsor, Prologis. Prologis helps businesses across the globe scale their supply chains with an expansive portfolio of logistics real estate and the only end-to-end solutions platform addressing the critical initiatives of global logistics today. Learn more at prologis.com.
Tom Friedman, thanks so much for coming back on GZERO.
Ian, great to be with you.
Start with Iran. Big news, of course, in so many different directions. So given everything we've seen, rate what you think the success of the United States and Israel has been in Iran and their actions over the past weeks.
Let's start at 30,000 feet, if I could, Ian. Going back to last year when Israel began to take down Hezbollah and then Iran's air defenses. And now Iran's more directly its nuclear program. What we're seeing is a huge event. It's the equivalent of the 1967 defeat of Egypt, Jordan, and Syria, which remade the Middle East. And I believe this defeat of the Iran threat network will have vast implications in the region as well. Anything that reduces Iran's influence, that's a really good thing because its influence has been entirely malign, both at home and regionally and internationally, when you think of the drones they're giving Russia to kill Ukrainians. But exactly what form it will take, how it gets locked in, does it require more combat? Does it lead to a diplomatic solution? All of that is TBD in my mind. But this first step was necessary. It's not sufficient, but it was an important step in my view.
So take a step back. Before the fighting started, before the Israelis started the fighting, and Trump wants to be a peacemaker, of course, and he also wants to remake the Middle East. And we saw that with the Abraham Accords that you've talked about an awful lot. Iran is clearly and was in a much, much weaker and more vulnerable position. Now, weaker and more vulnerable means if you attack them, they're probably not going to do as much to respond. But it also means that if you push on negotiations, they're more likely to accept something they wouldn't have accepted before. Given those two routes, do you think that Trump should have leaned more into the military side or should have leaned more into the diplomatic side, given what we've seen?
Honestly, I don't know. All I know is now I hope he leans into the diplomatic side because I think what you're going to see triggered is a real internal debate in Iran. It was not going to happen while the guns were firing. It's not going to happen the morning after the supreme leader says we won, we showed them, etc. But all real politics in the Middle East happens the morning after. And you can already see the contours, I think, of a debate shaping up between the president and elements of the Revolutionary Guards. And one side is basically saying we need to rush to a bomb. And the other is saying, well, that rush to a bomb has been a complete and utter failure. It's isolated us from the world. We've wasted a generation. We've wasted billions of dollars. Now it's time to do a deal and cash in that bomb for something that will actually propel us forward as a country. So how Trump manages that dialogue inside Iran, how he tilts it to one way or another, I think is important not only for the region, but also for regime change in Iran. We cannot do that. Only Iranians can do that. But we can play on the different forces there and create incentives for the better forces over the darker ones.
Now, Trump has been saying that there are incentives for the Iranians to do that, that, make Iran great again, give up the nukes. You need some money, you need infrastructure, we should help rebuild you. The Israeli prime minister, of course, is not saying that, not at all. How does that play out?
I think it's a very interesting question you're raising, Ian, and I'm asking myself the same, because Trump ultimately is a deal maker. Unfortunately, the way he approaches these things is he deals with Russia and Iran the same way. It's just two children squabbling. Ukraine and Iran, Russia, they're just children squabbling. Iran and Israel, they're just children squabbling. And we must find a way to make peace between them. But of course, Putin wasn't looking for peace. He was looking for a piece of Ukraine. That's the only peace he was looking for. And Iran is not looking for a piece of Israel. It's looking for a piece of Israel. And not, by the way, a piece of Lebanon, Jordan, and Iraq as well. And so there's a danger sometimes with Trump that he just sees everything as a transaction between two casino owners. And there's no sort of moral difference between the two. That said, I think there is a value in Trump's approach of saying that let's see if we can begin a process of really what President Obama wanted to do, what President Bush wanted to do, of ultimately drawing Iran into the world and the forces there that want to be part of the world, as opposed to those who want to rule through and by isolation from the world. And I think that's a very important process that will clash with Netanyahu. Netanyahu wants regime change, period, paragraph. He wants this regime to collapse, and God knows what will come after. But on this, I think Trump's instinct is right. If this regime is going to change, it's going to fracture first at the top and only then, transition to something. There'll be tension between Trump and Israel on this, as there will be on Gaza, because now that Trump is finished with, in his mind, Iran, he'll want to finish with the Gaza problem as well.
I want to stick with Iran for now. We'll get to Gaza, I promise. But okay, so, Trump did flirt with regime change for a brief tweet. Said, I'm just asking questions, but, if this regime can't do it, someone else can. Of course, he also said, we know where the supreme leader is, and we can kill him if you guys don't behave. The Israelis, on the other hand, have been talking much more about, we kind of like to kill him. We sort of want to get rid of, we want to decapitate this regime. What do you think happens if the supreme leader is gone? Okay, I mean, that doesn't remove the theocracy. It certainly doesn't remove the military leadership. How vulnerable is this whole process to the top of the Iran leadership staying in place?
Ian, none of us know, because this regime has been in power since 1979. It's also been something of a black box. You talk to Iranian experts, they never quite know what are the different alliances inside and outside and who's with who, and who is up and who is down. It's a very dark black box. So I think it's very hard to predict what would happen. It could be a good outcome. It could be chaos. Remember, this is a country with some significant minorities, Azeris in particular, and one just doesn't know when you start to pull the thread on a country like this.
And so your knee-jerk reaction on that is the devil we know is in a weak position. They've just been attacked. We should do everything we can to incent reasons not to redevelop a nuclear weapon and to come to the table. Let's look ahead, not to just the day after, but over the next few months. What are the things that the United States, with allies, if you wish, should be doing to help facilitate that outcome?
Well, again, good question. I think it's get together with our allies. Let's appoint a committee of the original participants in the JCPOA, the Obama nuclear Iran deal, and basically say to the Iranians.
Does that include the Russians and the Chinese, by the way, because they were in it first time around?
That's a very good question. I don't know. That's a very good question. I'm not sure. I think that would complicate it. So I would prefer to do it in that sense bilaterally, just the U.S. and Iran, and keep it simple. But say to the Iranians that, hey, if you are ready to forego any enrichment, or you could imagine a deal, Ian, where we say to them, yes, you have the right to enrich up to 3.5 or whatever, but Iran chooses not to do it. Okay, you could imagine some face-saving arrangement like that. If you will do that under IAEA supervision, we're ready to lift sanctions. We're ready to reintegrate you with the world. We have to step back again for 1 second. In the U.S.-Iran Cold War since 1979 has been one of the factors that has most destabilized and perverted the Middle East and prevented it from coming together in any coherent way, a European Union. If we could get behind that, if we could get beyond that, that would be a very important thing. I'd prefer to see it, obviously, with a different Iranian regime. But if as a transition, it's with this regime, that's a good thing. I would favor that under the condition that Iran is completely deprived of its ability to enrich nuclear material and create a nuclear bomb. Now, one of the things, I've been to Iran twice. Have you been to Iran by any chance?
Nope, sadly, I have not.
Yeah, so I've been there twice in the late 90s when you could still go. And Ian, both times I was there, you know what I was struck by? There were debates in the parliament of people raising their hands saying, why are we giving money to Hezbollah? Why are we giving money to Palestinians? Why are we wasting our tax dollars? There's no love lost between Iranians and Arabs over this. The Palestine issue is not organic to Iran at all. I predict you're going to see a lot of that now when things calm down there. And there will be a debate, as I say. One side will say, told you, we need a bomb. Wouldn't have happened if we didn't have one. And the other side will say, told you, pursuing a bomb this way has destroyed our country and lost a generation and a half.
And they're both right, by the way, Tom.
Yeah, and that's a good way to put it.
That's why there's a challenge here.
Yeah, there's evidence on both sides.
You're listening to the GZERO World with Ian Bremmer podcast, your weekly geopolitical deep dive into the world's biggest news stories, featuring in-depth conversations with global leaders and newsmakers. To get more of GZERO's insights on global politics every morning, sign up for our free newsletter, GZERO Daily, at gzeromedia.com.
Now, on the Palestinian issue, we should move to that. I mean, clearly, as we saw when the Iranians were under the gun and they were negotiating in the last minute with the Americans, it wasn't like part of the negotiations from Iran was, and we have to end the war in Gaza, right? I mean, like this with the revealed preference is they don't care about these people. So the Israeli Prime Minister, Bibi Netanyahu, is now in a much stronger position geopolitically and domestically. Right. I mean, this Iran war was super popular for him at home. This is a guy that almost lost a vote of no confidence just a couple weeks ago. And now if he called an election, he'd almost certainly win. Does it make it easier? And does it make it more likely that he comes to an agreement with the United States and, more importantly, on the ground in ending the war in Gaza?
Well, I want to challenge a little bit of part of your question. The latest polls in Israel after the Iran ceasefire showed no great political movement in the different parties in Israel over who could make a majority. So that may change in an election. No doubt Netanyahu has been strengthened by this. But as I wrote, the other day, in the people who won this war for Israel, the Air Force pilots, the scientists, the Mossad agents, the cyber warriors, the special forces, were, for the most part, not entirely, but for the most part, the very same people who were in the streets of Israel for 9 months
against him,
against Netanyahu.
Yep.
and his judicial coup. So you have a very interesting, dynamic here. And their attitude is, we will be damned if we won this war
for him,
claim victory to create a Jewish theocracy that our own kids will not want to live in. So the political chemistry in Israel is going to get really interesting. As it will in Iran. Now, Netanyahu is still stuck in Gaza, and he still has the same three choices Israel had before the war: partner with an international Arab force that is also partnered with the Palestinian Authority, and get out of Gaza and turn it over to them in a phased way, or just let your favorite gangs run the place, or Israel occupy it permanently. So those three awful choices that Netanyahu has been avoiding are still there. Obviously, if you were to choose door number one, let's do an international Arab peacekeeping force and partner with the PA and agree to open discussions with them on a long-term process based on real achievement, metrics on a Palestinian state. Oh, then Bibi wins the next 5 elections, because that will pave the way for normalization with Saudi Arabia, with Lebanon, with Syria, and with Iraq.
So why not do that now? I mean, I understand why he was unwilling to do it when he's got the sword of Damocles hanging over his head and these right-wing parties that are ready to bolt. I understand why he isn't willing to do it when he doesn't have a big military victory that shows that he's like the national champion. But I mean, even though the people that were fighting in Iran were not necessarily pro-Netanyahu folks, the fact is, this is a legacy win for him. Right.
It's a legacy win, but he can only lock it in if he ties it to a resolution in Gaza and a pathway forward on the Palestinian issue.
So do you think he knows that? Do you think he knows that?
He absolutely knows it. And he will be, I'm sure, looking for some tortured language that will satisfy the Saudis, and Americans, but not blow up his coalition. I personally would question whether that language is there. But it depends, how the Saudis want to play this. But I think there's a little over optimism on the Israeli side that somehow the Saudis just need a few words and hocus pocus and they'll do this. But we'll see. Wars have a way of really, especially big wars where one side wins big and the other loses, does have a way of changing things. And I'm just watching this closely.
And if you're advising Trump right now, is the right move lean in hard on ending the war in Gaza after everything you've just done for Israel?
Absolutely. Absolutely. If you just look at what's been happening in Gaza, the other day, 7 Israeli soldiers killed in an APC. The day before, or a couple of days before, 5 killed by an IED. What does that remind you of? The insurgency in Iraq.
Absolutely.
That's what they're basically sitting on. So Trump would be doing Israel an enormous favor. Now, there's a long history of Israeli prime ministers using American presidents to be able to force things through the cabinet that they can't. So I could imagine Netanyahu coming to the cabinet and saying, I would never do this. I would never do this. But that's Trump. He broke my arm. He broke he broke it. And so I could imagine that play kind of happening too. That's happened before in the past between U.S. and Israeli prime ministers. I hope so. At the same time, Palestinians need to get their act together and make sure they have a leadership in place that can build the institutions that will make any kind of Palestinian state even remotely possible and credible down the road.
Well, now that last one is kind of an incredibly tall order. I mean,
I don't think we're going from here back to like the Oslo negotiations, that we're not going to go from here to land for peace. I think we're going to go from here. The only way, given what happened in Gaza on October 7th and after, we have to have a pre-process to the peace process. The pre-process will be Palestinian institution building for Israeli restraint. No more Israeli settlements, and Palestinians reform the Palestinian Authority. You do that for a period of time, then you basically get a chance to build some confidence for a broader negotiation. But given what happened on October 7th, there's nobody going from here to any kind of territorial compromise tomorrow.
Now, a tougher question is, let's imagine that you're able to engineer a ceasefire, an end to the war, a durable ceasefire in Gaza. Israel has in many ways isolated itself from so many around the world, including a lot of voters here in the United States. because of the war crimes that they have perpetrated in Gaza, because of the extent of the humanitarian damage that has been wrested upon, well over 1 million Palestinian people. Can they undo that? I mean, can Israel, certainly the support for what Israel did in Iran, at least in the West, was pretty high. Can they come back into the community of advanced industrial nations, given everything that's happened in Gaza? What needs to happen there?
Very important question. One I've been warning about.
You have, yeah.
And which is that it's one, the nature of this war, Ian, was always going to involve a lot of civilian casualties, tragically, because you had a formal military fighting against a informal force embedded among civilians,
right,
and in fact dug under them in tunnels which they didn't allow any of those Palestinian civilians to seek shelter in. So this war was always going to involve a lot of casualties, whether Israel had been the most surgical country in the world, and it was not, because there was a lot of anger and revenge involved in this attack, because they were humiliated on October 7th. So what I argued was basically, if you're going to fight this war in Gaza, you're going to need three things. You're going to need time, you're going to need resources, and you're going to need legitimacy, because it's going to involve a lot of casualties. The only way to have all three is to have a Palestinian partner, to make clear you are going into this war to forge finally a different relationship with Palestinians, to destroy Hamas as an organization, precisely because it's been an enemy of peace from the very beginning, and to help Palestinians birth a different leadership. Now, you can say, God, Friedman, that's like crazy, naive. Are you nuts? But tell me what the alternative is. Tell me how this alternative is better. And had Israel done that, had this war been fought to secure Israel, but also to nurture a different relationship with Palestinians, I'm not saying it wipes away all those casualties.
Yeah.
A lot of people died. A lot of children died. But it would have given Israel a much higher moral ground to stand on.
Well, there is an alternative. The alternative is you don't have a higher moral ground, but you don't think you need one, because you're the dominant player militarily, technologically, economically. I mean, that certainly has been Trump's view, right? I mean, the United States, how much moral legitimacy does the United States have in the world today? And the answer is, it was never as high as Americans would have liked it to have been, but it's a hell of a lot less today, right? For lots and lots of reasons that you and I have both talked about for decades now. And yet, Trump's position is doesn't matter because we're a lot more powerful than you are, right? So, there is an alternative for Israel. And a lot of Gulf states are willing to do business. It's not like the UAE was saying, over the course of the war in Gaza, we're going to cut off our diplomatic relations. We're going to stop acting as tourists. You go to Dubai, right? Look at how many Israelis are there. They didn't cut that off. Right, at any point. So I'm wondering if the Israeli government thinks the law of the jungle is just fine for them.
We're certainly going to an age where they might think that. I would argue, though, that Dubai and the Gulf states are one thing, and Western Europe and American college campuses are another. And my concern, which I've written about, is that when this war is over, journalists are not allowed to wander around independently
in Gaza, right?
Only go as part of an Israeli military escort. And my concern is when this war is over and every photographer in the world and journalist crawls over Gaza, and you really see the Dresden-esque impact there, that I think it's going to be a bad day for Israel and a bad day for world Jewry. If there's no peace process going on the other side, if there's no hope of a better future. And my concern, as I've written, is that my grandchildren will grow up in a world where they will learn what it is to be Jewish in a world where the Jewish state is a pariah state. And that is a very bad thing. And that's what I've been arguing with Israel to seek to avoid. There are many Israelis who understand that. I wrote a column just a few days ago quoting Israeli Air Force pilots, urging their colleagues to understand what you're doing. Insist on knowing what targets you're hitting and what the casualties are. There's a big debate going on in Israel about this. But right now, it's not the governing view. My hope is once the Israeli hostages are returned, God willing, and the fighting stops, and the killing of Palestinians, God willing, you will see a debate in Israel. The hostages and their continued detention by Hamas has made Israelis crazy because everybody knows somebody who knows somebody. And I think because of that, they haven't fully absorbed what has been done there in their name and by their military. And there's going to be no excusing it. And by the way, one must never lose sight of the fact that Hamas, in my view, did this deliberately. This was an act of human sacrifice to sacrifice tens of thousands of Palestinians in a war that had no defined goal whatsoever other than the destruction of Israeli Jews in order to produce material on TikTok that would influence the next global generation. And it worked.
Tom Friedman, I appreciate you.
Thanks, Ian.
That's it for today's edition of the GZERO World Podcast. Do you like what you heard? Of course you do. Why not make it official? Why don't you rate and review GZERO World? 5 stars, only 5 stars, otherwise don't do it. On Apple, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Tell your friends.
The GZERO World Podcast is brought to you by our lead sponsor, Prologis. Prologis helps businesses across the globe scale their supply chains with an expansive portfolio of logistics real estate and the only end-to-end solutions platform addressing the critical initiatives of global logistics today. Learn more at prologis.com.